Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a totally fascinating historical clash between beautiful, high-minded philosophy and, well, brutal reality. We're looking at this profound paradox straight out of ancient Rome, one that absolutely forces us to question the limits of our own ideals when they're put to the ultimate test. So let's dive right into this paradox by looking at Junius Rusticus. His life is this captivating, honestly kind of tragic case study. Here we have a guy who literally helped mold the world's most famous philosopher king, yet he ended up ordering a brutal execution that completely contradicted his own teachings. It's a perfect illustration of how absolute power tests our deepest values, and, how easily even the wisest among us can just lose their way when they're tasked with protecting a system.
Part 1. The Philosopher and King, Shaping the Ultimate Philosopher King.
What's truly fascinating here is the sheer intimacy and profound impact of their relationship. Rusticus literally taught the most powerful man in the world how to be humble, patient, and forgiving. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor whose power was essentially absolute, right? Yet he deferred to Rusticus, greeting him with a kiss and honoring him way above anyone else on his staff. Rusticus taught Marcus how to handle the anger of others and how to meet people halfway. And keep that in mind, because it's a lesson we're going to see severely tested a bit later.
You see, Rusticus wasn't just some theorist locked away in a dusty library. He actively shaped history. Perhaps his most incredible act was simply handing a young, 25-year-old Marcus Aurelius a personal copy of notes from the great sage Epictetus. Just think about that. With that one simple gesture, Rusticus changed the course of a man's life, and, by extension, the entire world. It just goes to show how history so often hinges on tiny, seemingly unremarkable events between the right two people at exactly the right time. Moving on to Part 2, the burden of civic duty, leaving the library for the streets of Rome. We can trace his rapid ascent pretty clearly here. Born around 100 AD into a family literally known for political defiance, he grew from a brilliant student and soldier into a consul and ultimately the urban prefect. When Marcus became emperor in 161 AD, Rusticus was drawn super deeply into the role of magistrate and advisor, and by 162 AD, he was essentially acting as the mayor and chief of police for the entire city of Rome. So the crucial takeaway is that Rusticus suddenly held immense, completely unchecked power over a vast, complicated, and let's face it, pretty corrupt city. He went from being a philosopher discussing theoretical ethics over wine to a hardened bureaucrat whose absolute main job was defending the status quo and maintaining order. The abstract, beautiful ideals of Stoicism were now colliding head-on with the gritty reality of Roman legal enforcement. Which brings us to Part 3, the trial of Justin Martyr. A minor case makes history. The case involved a Christian philosopher named Justin, who we now know as Justin Martyr, and his students. They had been denounced by a cynic philosopher named Crescens and accused of being atheists. Now, a quick reminder, in ancient Rome, this didn't mean they didn't believe in any god. It meant they flat out refused to acknowledge the Roman gods, which was seen as a massive direct threat to the state. Interestingly, Justin had actually studied Stoicism himself, so he reasonably expected a fair philosophical hearing from a fellow thinker, like his Stoic judge, Rusticus. Well, instead of a philosophical dialogue, they reached a totally deadly stalemate. On one side, we have the Roman state, represented by Rusticus. To the state, religion was a social invention, and refusing to sacrifice was disruptive, crazy, and highly dangerous to public order. But standing against him is Justin Martyr, representing the immovable object of individual faith, refusing to stoop to what he considered false worship. It was literally the ultimate clash between state compliance and individual conscience. All right, Part 4. When Stoic philosophy fails. The limits of philosophical ideals. The Stoics, dating all the way back to Zeno and Chrysippus, held this incredibly beautiful concept called sympatheia. It's the belief that we are all part of one large body, each with our own unique role to play. Rusticus and Marcus Aurelius discussed this exact concept constantly. They wrote extensively about how even the misinformed or stubborn fit into the grand human equation. Yet, the moment he sat as a judge, Rusticus completely abandoned this universal sympathy when faced with a political dissident who refused to conform. Just listen to this chilling exchange, actually recorded in the historical trial transcripts. Rusticus was utterly baffled and, frankly, deeply frustrated by Justin's uncompromising stance. He completely lost the patience that he had so famously taught the emperor to maintain. He just couldn't comprehend why on earth a man would choose death over a simple, perfunctory act of civic compliance.
And the absolute tragedy of the whole situation really lies in the missed opportunities for mercy. I mean, Rusticus had the full weight of the Roman legal system behind him. Justin was just one small guy with a minority belief. Rusticus could have easily just slapped him on the wrist. He actually gave Justin a chance to repent, basically implying, look, just do the sacrifice, you don't even have to mean it. But when Justin refused, Rusticus, completely blinded by his black and white duty to protect the Roman system, chose strict legalism over humanity. He totally lost sight of the bigger picture.
So, because Justin chose to die for his beliefs rather than compromise and live, Rusticus chose to flex his immense power. In the name of the philosopher King Marcus Aurelius, Rusticus ordered these men to be cruelly beaten, whipped until the skin was literally torn from their bodies, and then beheaded. It became one of the most famous and brutal executions in early Christian history.
This brings us to our final section, Part 5, The Paradox of Power, Repeating the Sins of the Past.
Looking at this through a modern lens, the most heartbreaking realization is the brutal generational irony. Nearly a century earlier, Junius Rusticus's own grandfather, Aurelius, bravely stood against a paranoid emperor. He absolutely refused to compromise his Stoic beliefs, and he was executed for it. Now, years later, the roles are completely reversed. Junius Rusticus, wielding the awesome power of the state, used it to kill a man who was displaying the exact same unwavering bravery that got his own grandfather killed. He literally became the very tyrant his family had historically defied.
At the time, this execution barely made a ripple. Rome was completely distracted by a massive plague that was killing millions, not to mention the ongoing Parthian War. A death sentence for one lawbreaker probably felt like a minor footnote to an urban prefect who was just desperately trying to maintain order. But, history is funny that way. While Romans barely noticed, history remembered. The victim, Justin, became an eternal inspiration for the persecuted, while the highly esteemed Stoic judge became a villain to millions.
This idea really captures why this explainer matters for us today. It shows how massive, complex institutions can make even the wisest, most philosophically grounded individuals commit horrific injustices. Rusticus was duty-bound. He honestly, truly thought he was protecting the peace. But in protecting the status quo, he entirely lost his shared humanity.
So I'll leave you to ponder this final thought. It is so easy to judge Rusticus from the safety and comfort of the present day. But power is a tremendous test of our personal values. If you are ever handed absolute authority to uphold a system, and suddenly that system demands you crush an individual who is simply following their conscience, well, when your duty and your shared humanity inevitably collide, which one will you choose?